Hi folks, hope you're okay. Here's another blog for you for this week. The other night I was watching a film on the television. The title of it was called Sudden Impact, and starred one of my old favourites, Clint Eastwood. Of course he was playing Dirty Harry, or Harry Callahan, a very tough cop in San Francisco. And of course Callahan always defends the good guys and normally shoots the bad guys. I've watched many such films of Dirty Harry and so on, and though they are make-believe, I often wish we had more police like Harry Callahan. Callahan has many enemies, however, within his own police force. And some try to get rid of him because they think that he's a dinosaur. You know, many of us today who remember the old ways of right and wrong have enemies. We call them the PC Brigade, Political Correctness Brigade. And these people don't seem to know the difference between right and wrong anymore. These enemies are found in Parliament, in local councils, and even within our own police force. They're the people of power, and they are the Political Correct Brigade. It's interesting that Adolf Hitler created an atmosphere of political correctness in order to do what he wanted to do. In fact, all dictators have followed the same system. I think it was Tony Blair's government that was the first to create political correctness in our country, and it's lasted up until now. And just look at the damage it's done in our country. Look, for example, at the Rotherham scandal. Over 1,000 children sexually abused. Can you believe that in our country? Over 1,000 children sexually abused over a 16-year period, and no one in authority said anything, even though they knew that it was going off. And the reason they wouldn't say anything, of course, was because the perpetrators were all from a Pakistani background, and so those in power simply looked the other way, because we can't say anything about Asian people, can we? You know, folks, it's criminal what took place. If I knew of a crime being committed and said nothing, I would be charged with aiding and abetting. But officials in our nation get away with it simply because they don't want to rock the boat, and so they hide behind political correctness and then declare their innocence afterwards. It was in the good of the country, so they say. My biggest concern is that the church seems to have no voice these days. It doesn't seem to speak out about these wrongs that we see in our society. On my audio and video page on this website there is a talk by a Dr. Lawrence White, and it's called The Sin of Silence. I recommend that everyone listens to that sermon. It's brilliant. Also note the quote by Dietrich Bonhoeffer on the home page on this site. I'm putting a few of his quotes on because I like a lot of what he said. But the first one on the home page is this. He said, "Silence in the face of evil, that is, silence in the face of evil, is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless." Then he went on to say, "Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act." If any group of people needs to speak out in this day and age, it's the church, it's Christians. Because the reality is that our nation has abandoned God and turned against the Christian message. And so, as a result, we have fallen into many dangers. The one thing that I and many of my Christian friends agree with is that this country no longer enjoys the protection of God like we have done in the past. We have kicked God out of our schools. We've brought in evolution in its place. They now say that the teaching of creationism is considered to be as dangerous as Islamic extremism. Can you believe that? It's true. We've kicked God out of almost all of our public life. People have been given the sack for wearing a cross at work and so on and so forth. And just look at the state that we're in now as a nation. We're told that trained terrorists have come back from Syria and other places, and they're now walking our streets, and that it's more than likely that they will strike at us in the near future. What a state we're in. The United Kingdom is becoming a disunited kingdom, and many of the Scots want their independence. And if you know the history of Scotland and England working together and what benefits it brought, you'd be very sorry to see them leave. You know, it doesn't take rocket science to figure out what is wrong in our country. The book of Proverbs, chapter 14 and verse 34 says this: righteousness exalts a nation, but sin condemns any people. When I was a young Christian 50 years ago, having been converted out of atheism, I studied the prophets and the end times teachings. When I read about the tribulation and the great tribulation, it did give me one problem. And one day I said to God, how can you judge this country when we are a fairly decent country? And of course, way back then, 50 years ago, we were a fairly decent country. You know, the Lord led me to a scripture in Genesis chapter 15 and particularly verse 16. And here God is saying to Abraham that his descendants will live in another land other than Canaan for 400 years. He's speaking about Egypt, of course. But then God says that they will come back to the promised land. I will bring them back, he says. But listen to this. But only when the sin of the Amorites has reached its full measure. You know, folks, there are some things about God that never change. The way he does things, his methods, his tactics. And one of them is he doesn't judge people until their sin reaches its full measure. I made a note of that scripture and I carry it round with me to this very day. 50 years after reading that scripture, this once fair land has become a cesspool of iniquity. How soon will it be before our sin has reached its full measure? And then what might happen to us? I wonder. Another method of God in the Old Testament, still the same today, was that when Israel turned against God, he would bring hordes of their enemies against them to enslave them. I wonder, could this be why we're subjected to the rule of the EU? Makes you wonder. And why we have so many immigrants living amongst us who clearly don't like our ways and now are becoming a threat to us. Who knows? Well, it's food for thought for this week. Anyway, folks, I'm not taking any chances. I'm sticking close to the Lord. I hope you are too. God bless you. Have a good week. Bye for now.